Hello and welcome. Pointing out the dangers of globalization, this author achieved international fame by challenging the practices of big multinational business in poor developing countries. Her in-depth investigative journalism has changed the way millions see the world. This week on One-on-One, meet the renowned activist and writer, Naomi Klein. Raised in a family of activists, Naomi Klein, born in Canada to American parents, says she watched them supporting social causes and attending protests and got to see firsthand the importance of challenging those at the top. That came through in her internationally best-selling book No Logo in 2000, an insightful study of the power of branding and its influence on the practice of big business. Soon Klein became the poster girl for the anti-globalization movement and took her activism to another level. In 2007, with her thoroughly researched book, The Shock Doctrine, she questioned the motive of not only wealthy corporations, but also governments in taking advantage of conflicts to further their profits and causes. Naomi Klein believes she's simply doing her job as a journalist by digging out the facts and figures in a story. But those at the sharp end of her pen soon realize they're up against an extraordinary writer. Well, it's great to talk with you, Naomi. And I've got to ask, you're a writer, you're a journalist, you're an activist, but how do you define yourself?
I usually define myself as an activist journalist, by which I mean a journalist who is embedded in movements for social change. I identify with the movements that I write about. I'm not a propagandist for those movements. I'm committed to the truth. I'm committed to fact-checking, but I'm proud to be associated with these movements and aligned with these movements. And of course, I'm an author.
When you write, in fact, your books have impact because the multinational corporations, politicians, they do listen. Is that something you think about when you set out on a project? Is it that you want to make that mark with them?
No, I don't write for multinational corporations or powerful politicians. I do have a reader in mind, and it's, in a sense, it's kind of myself when I was younger. There's this phrase that journalists use a lot, which is speaking truth to power. And I think a lot of journalists do think about their work in those terms. I really don't. I think about speaking truth about power to people who generally see themselves as powerless, but who I think are more powerful than they know.
Your book, No Logo, which put you sort of out there as a very, very high-end writer and someone who does investigative work, was one of these interesting books that came around by word of mouth. A lot of people, spread the word about this book. And I wonder, when you look at that, what did you think in terms of why it resonated? Why do you think that book resonated with so many people?
Well, the success of No Logo was a lot about the timing of the book, and it was an incredible experience because it took me about 4 years to write No Logo, and I was documenting what I saw as the rise of a new movement, of what I was calling anti-corporate activism. But at the time, it was really just pockets, like students fighting sweatshops or the environmental movement taking on Shell in Nigeria, but it wasn't articulated or coalesced as a movement. But it seemed to me that there were these common threads, and I was trying to identify those common threads. The book was at the printer when the protests in Seattle against the World Trade Organization happened in November 1999. And that movement was the coming together of all of these threads that I had been documenting. So it was one of those moments where, every once in a while, a book and a movement come around at the same time, and it becomes hard to tell where one stops, and the other starts. And it's a really wonderful experience to be the author of a book like that. And that's what happened to me with No Logo. It kind of just merged with the movement that it had been documenting because the movement came to world attention just as the book was being published.
And of course, globalization was very much, as you say, in the foreground of discussion in the public domain. And you wrote in that book how one example was that Nike had paid, in 1992, had paid Michael Jordan, the basketball star, $20 million, which was more than they'd spent on their 30,000 staff in Indonesia. And when you look at that kind of balance, is that, essentially the root of what you object to when it comes to globalization?
Well, with No Logo, I was documenting a shift in the way corporations were producing and the way they were thinking about themselves. And I was documenting how that shift was playing out in the world of marketing, in the world of sponsorship, and also in the world of work. So, you have to remember, I was doing this research in the late 90s, so there really wasn't an articulation of even really the idea of branding. When I started reading these management consultants talking about branding, this was all news to me. Now everybody talks about branding, your own brand, and people study it all the time. But at this time, there was still a sense of, there's advertising, a product, and we still thought of corporations like Nike as primarily producing products. So what I was documenting in the book was how does it impact the types of jobs that we get when you have all of these corporations suddenly having these revelations that they are not in the product business at all, or at least they don't want to be. They want to be in the ideas business, in the image business, in the lifestyle business. And so for me, there was a real revelation when I was doing the research that there was a connection between these inordinate amounts of money that was being spent on advertising and sponsorship and lifestyle brand building, and the fact that at the very same time, these same companies were saying, you know what, why do we even own factories? We can just contract all of this out and let other people deal with this sort of boring world of things while we are in the ideas business. So it wasn't really about globalization. I mean, globalization enabled this outsourcing process and making it so easy to just turn a job into a contract and move that contract around the world wherever you could make it cheapest. But No Logo was actually not about globalization. It was really about this change in the way corporations thought of themselves.
But how has your own philosophy changed with all that you've discovered and researched over the years? How has it affected your own ideology?
I think we're always deepened by the research that we do, and every new research project changes me, probably in ways that I'm not analyzed enough, or introspective enough to know. I'm changed by spending time in Iraq. I'm changed by spending time in New Orleans. I'm changed by being inspired by people and being enraged by people. But in terms of the actual philosophy of what I'm documenting and what interests me, I really see a very clear connection between the work I was doing with No Logo and the work I'm doing now with the shock doctrine. Both of these projects are really about the loss of the public sphere. And this is why I was interested in branding in the first place with No Logo. I wasn't a student of marketing. I wasn't interested in marketing. I was interested in education and the arts and politics. And I was watching how this new philosophy in the corporate world of selling ideas was devouring the public sphere, how it meant that all of these arts events were being taken over, overrun with corporate sponsor. How my own university, which was a public institution, was suddenly having advertisements all over the place, and research was being sponsored. So my interest in this came out of an interest in the political and cultural loss of public space. And with the shock doctrine, certainly a much more serious work, and it's a much more overtly political and economic work, and looking at the ideology itself. But at the core of the ideology that I'm documenting in the shock doctrine is this idea that there's no reason for public space, that corporations can do everything that the state does, that is being done not for profit. Everything can be done for profit. So that it's really the same project. It's just different manifestations of the same project.
Well, let me ask you about the way this activism has come into your life, because if I take you back to your childhood, there was a lot of activism in your family. What are your earliest memories of that?
My earliest memories, I suppose it would be like a stroller eye view at an anti-nuclear demonstration, or
very low level.
Yeah, very, very just people's knees or something, because my parents took me. My mother took me to women's marches, and both my parents were involved in the anti-nuclear movement. My father as a healthcare worker, and my mother made documentary films about the peace movement.
Now, I was reading how you actually had your own sort of brand fixation as a kid. You went through, I gather, at 6 first starting to recognize signs and see things that appealed to you as brands.
Yeah.
And that it was, early on you were looking at them.
Well, I think all kids do. I mean, this is why so much marketing is actually geared towards kids. And in No Logo, I write about fights that we would get into on car trips because my brother and I would want to go to some terrible fast food restaurant, and my parents would insist that we have a healthy picnic.
And you were a Canadian mall rat as well, too. The kids who hang around the malls, huh?
Well, I was a child of the 80s, is all I can say. And, I don't think there was really anything remarkable about what I was doing as a teenager. It was only kind of remarkable in the context of being from this very political family that was trying to make me something really from another age. They really did not want me to give in to 80s culture. And it was just too powerful for them. They lost that battle.
So explain to me in your high school yearbook, when one of the kids wrote that you were most likely to be in jail for stealing peroxide.
Stealing peroxide. I think that was a reference to the fact that my hair color would change weekly in high school. So that was one of the things I was known for in high school, was how much I dyed my hair. It wasn't just blonde. It would change. It was sort of our class entertainment, keeping track of my hair color.
Well, Naomi, I've got lots more questions for you. We're going to take a short break here on One-on-One. We'll be right back.